Welcome to another episode of Context is King. I'm Eric, and joining me as always is Ash. How you doing?
Dressed alike.
Well, we did call each other this morning, finally.
That was someone else.
So let's talk about Theranos, or the delicate art of the scam. So here's a company who, I think for 15 years, they claimed that they were revolutionizing the blood testing business. They raised $700 million, but they said they were doing $100 million. And now the woman is I think she's paying $500,000 and she's no jail time.
No jail time, no. So black guy, Elizabeth Holmes. So black dude sells cigarettes outside of a convenience store. Cops basically kill him. White lady rips off investors to the tune of $900 million. Doesn't get any jail time. And basically just pays a $500,000 loan. So I think this is how revolution starts. So look, it's crazy. I mean, a lot of people suspected that this was a scam. The Wall Street Journal, to their credit, wrote about this, and Holmes doubled down, and she, entrenched herself and said,
she got backed into a corner, I imagine.
But
right?
you think if you get backed into a corner, you wouldn't keep digging a hole, and that's what she did. And it's kind of like back in the day. I think Mike Hart, I forgot, in 1984, a presidential candidate was like, "I dare you. There is no affair. I've never done anything." And the journalists were like, "Really? It's on." So you have to be careful. And I think she got cocky and arrogant, and the hype of a female entrepreneur that was going to maybe be the next Steve Jobs got to her head. And it was a scam. And it's funny because in 2003, I wrote a screenplay, which was really more of a manuscript in screenplay format, called Fiduciary Duty, about Marcel Samuel Collins and Michael Bryan Anderson, so Masters in Science and an MBA.
Oh, I like where you're going there. Okay.
And it was basically a business guy that falls for this business grad that falls for this scientist. And it turns out to be a big scam.
And whatever happened with the screenplay?
It's gathering dust somewhere, but it's coming back as part of all of our efforts to move into scripted. It is actually going to come back and see. Well, maybe now I should dust it off and.
It's timely.
Yeah, it's timing.
Okay, so you in the past have tried to raise capital. So if
many times and failed, and a few times got some offers, but never raised capital.
Okay, I'm going to put you in the OJ chair here. Oh. If you were to commit the crime, if you were to try and scam people to this type of magnitude, how would you get away with it?
Well, so let's just say this is putting on our OJ hat, or going back to my screenwriting days. I think this is a unique situation because investors in general do have fear of missing out, FOMO.
I suffer from FOMO, big time.
Well,
Not in investing.
Human nature. I mean, it's good if you got to manage that. You got to be Yoda. But I mean, I think FOMO is a real thing. And as an entrepreneur, FOMO is real, and you got to bat that down and be like, stop it, focus, and do what you got to do. But so all investors have FOMO, and that's why sometimes they make dubious mistakes. Now, investors look for that one grand slam, knowing that if 9 projects fail, it's all good. So one, I think there was that concept of FOMO. But 2, look, even though this was 15 years in the making, there's been this obsession to find, and we want to root for female entrepreneurs. We want to root for entrepreneurs that are, black or Asian or
marginalized,
like the underdog. Like we all legitimately are rooting for those stories. The problem is when we then let our guard down, right? It's like, that's where I think this went off the rails. And then 2, it's like revolutionizing the blood testing business. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of
What were they actually doing?
Well, what they were doing is they were basically saying, look, our testing requires 1/100th of the blood sample size, and it's much cheaper. And they claim to have hundreds of tests in Walgreens and other places, but really something like 10 of these tests were valid. And when people start to push back, they kind of just said, again, when you're revolutionizing the world, when you're out to do things differently, like she would quote Gandhi. She was like, first they ridicule you, then they hate you, and then they fear you, and then they love you type of thing. So the issue is, and I've said this before when the whole over Uber as a parallel, the same journalists that prop these companies up, and they're like, wow, they're going to revolutionize the world, they play by their own rules, they build up these stories and characters and narratives without really asking them questions. And what happened, okay, so that's the fear of missing out. But it's true, though, that when you are talking to investors don't initially ask you for audited statements. You can literally write, we made revenues of $100 million this year in an email. There's this assumption that you're not a charlatan. There's an assumption you're not a crook. There's an assumption you're not a fraud, right?
Yeah, but there's due process.
No, but now here's the thing. Theranos is unique in that it's if you look at their board you would assume would have medical professionals and others in the field of science and medicine. They had like, I don't want to quote, this is not, but they had, for example, like Henry Kissinger or Colin Powell. I apologize, I should have checked that before. But they basically had people that had big names, a lot of cachet, but that would almost like a hook bait others into their lair, but that had really no clue about the business. So if Holmes is sitting there and saying to them, gibberish, gibberash, gibbery, they would just nod along and be like, we're going to change the world. And this is why boards are sometimes full of shit, because a right board will help a lot and avoid you from going off the rails, but the wrong board, like Friendster back in the day, the board at Friendster, before MySpace, before Facebook, you had MySpace, you had Friendster, they were like, we're going to change the world, when the CEO was like, we need servers, the site's not loading, right? So you got to be careful. So I think here you had this perfect storm of wanting to root for this female CEO, revolutionizing health. 3, you have fear of missing out. And 4, a board that fundamentally was not doing its job, and probably investors that went along thinking, we'll get the audited statements later, we'll do more due diligence. But there's an assumption that you're not dealing with a criminal. And she's not admitting criminality, and I think this is what says a lot about society, because if even half of everything is true, she should go to jail.
So in the case of someone like Martin Shkreli, for example, he's doing jail time. She's not. What's the difference here?
Nothing to do with gender, if that's what you're hinting at, Eric. No, basically, she settled. She didn't admit wrongdoing, but the court's like, okay, you're not going to waste our time. We'll settle. She also early on might have been greedy, cocky, arrogant, but not to the same level as the dude who came across and just as a, parasite, so to speak. But he also fought the charges. He was found guilty, so it's a bit like, yeah, you might kill someone, but if you settle and admit wrongdoing, they're not going to throw the book at you as much. So that's fundamentally the difference.
So in other words, he also doubled down on being an asshole.
Yeah, I mean, he was just one full tilt stupidity, and she kind of at some point cut her losses.
Right. Okay, gotcha. So, it'll be interesting to see if she gets back into the arena.
She was arrogant, but not stupid.
Yeah.
He was arrogant and stupid.
So do you think that she's going to eventually jump back in the arena again?
Well, if by arena you mean like running a company like that, probably not. For 10 years, she can't really be involved in that capacity. I might send her the script and change Marcel to Marcella, but she might just sit down with me to pick me with one of her blood-sucking devices.
Oy, oy, oy. All right, well, thank you very much. And thank you guys for tuning in. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we'll talk to you next time.